Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining us today for General Item Authoring 101. During this hour, you'll learn the basics of how to author custom technology enhanced items, or TEIs, on Edulastic. And Edulastic features over 50 item types. And while we won't get to each one in this webinar, you'll have the foundation to craft or tweak items to fit your vision during this event. We'll cover options for entering question stems, distractors, standards, metadata, and previewing your questions and more. There'll also be time for Q&A at the end of this session. And so that's kind of a general overview of what to expect today. And then I just want to go over a couple other things. So again, at the end, there will be questions and answers, but also to make sure that we don't lose your question in the chat, please make sure to put it in the Q&A box. Today's main presentation is by Jenny Takoyan, who is a former teacher and current customer success manager here at Edulastic. And my name is Ileana Betancourt, and it's my job to help connect teachers with awesome resources. And I've been working in education for about 10 years now. So we're very excited to be here with you today. If you are absolutely brand new to Edulastic, you have just entered your account, you're starting to look around, this webinar is going to go over how to create question items. But if you want to learn the basics of rostering, looking at the data, exploring the item bank, and more, you might want to go over to our YouTube channel and check out Edulastic 101. And don't do that now, stay with us, of course, but just bookmark that for later. Maybe take a screenshot so you can remember to go back and watch Edulastic 101 for an overview. And now I'm going to hand it off to Jenny. So Jenny, if you could just take over, tell a little bit about yourself and take it away from there.
Happily, I'm going to share my screen. Is that ready to go? I'm going to stop yours and I'm going to turn mine on.
Sounds great.
It's the same presentation. It'll just be me driving. No big
Perfect.
surprise there. Yeah. Okay, hi everybody. I'm excited to have you all here. We've got a really solid group, and this is about the time of the year over the last few years that I've been working with Edulastic that we sometimes will get the phone calls from instructional teams or PLC groups who are tasked with, in a day or a couple of weeks or a launch meeting, for the following year's benchmarks. So this may sound very familiar to many of you, that you'll get together and plan what those diagnostics look like or plan what those benchmarks look like for the next year. And so this is typically that time. And over the years that I've been working with Edulastic, which is almost 5 years now, over those years, we've refined the tools, the collaboration tools, the test assignment tools. A lot of these pieces we've made with those PLC groups in mind. And so I'm excited to share that with you, because rather than get that frantic phone call like, oh no, we're all gathered here and we can't figure out how to do X or Y, this is a really good opportunity to get that groundwork established so that you can really make the most of those meetings. So that's kind of one of the thinking, one of the prongs of why we started this. The other one is that a lot of teachers just want to have some more knowledge about how to use Edulastic and how to author. So if you fall into either one of those camps, this session is for you. And the idea behind this session is about 3/4 of the way in. If you are one of those people that just want to learn a little bit more about how to author, then I'm going to set you free to go practice while I go down the path a little bit deeper with those groups that are working on benchmarks or diagnostics. So in the past, yes, every year, every spring, this is the time that benchmark season hits. And it's really important, of course, but given the COVID, the distance learning, all of the upheaval that our students and our teachers have experienced this last year, it's no big surprise to you, and it's nothing new. I'm preaching to the choir, but diagnostics and benchmark exams have taken on a new level of criticality that just wasn't there before. So this might be really useful to you, and we are actually recording this session and another session happening next week that you and your groups can take a look at together on the on-demand version of it. And if you're being tasked with coming up with some of these diagnostics or these kind of benchmark exams that help decide how you're going to start the year next year, then you might be interested in both part 1 and part 2. So today is part 1. It's the authoring how-to. So for those of you that just have to get going and dive into the product and you're on a deadline, you're going to know how to set up the questions that you need. For those of you that have the time or the interest to come back next week, you can learn a little bit more of the pedagogy behind building fair, effective questions. It's some of those little tips and tricks that are how to ask a question, how to assign the answers, how to make something partial credit or full credit, etc. All those little nuances we'll be talking a little bit more about next week. So let's dive into what's happening today. So I'm going to start by talking to you about the power tools that authors will need to use. We're going to dive into the examples of building two different types of items. We're going to first start with the matching tables, and then we'll go to numeric entry. Now, I've purposely chosen this because given we don't have much time, today, we could spend hours going through all 50 plus types of items in Edulastic. But if by focusing on these two question types, they happen to be some of the most popular that you're going to see on state assessment tests, but they also are sort of agnostic. They span multiple different subjects. And so going through these and looking at the settings will give you an idea, hopefully will appeal to almost all of our users here. But also you can then take all that you've learned from those two question types and you can apply them to just the math or just the ELA types or what we might consider a traditional classic question type. So that's the thinking behind this. And this is our way of being able to hit the broadest group in the shortest amount of time and really give you tools that you can take. So because of that, I'm going to be focusing on the formatting of the questions and how you can adjust the settings to really customize each question for your particular group or your overall needs. I'm also then, after we go through each one of these styles and we give a little lowdown on how to build them, I'm going to talk a little bit about how to co-author or how to share with your colleagues, and then some of the assigned settings and the metadata settings and such. So about that time where we're talking about the share with colleagues, I'll mention it and we can take a break. And if you want to actually dive in and start practicing some of the questions, if you're one of those people that just wants to learn a little bit more about how to build questions and that's your time to do it, save your questions and we'll get to them at the end. Yeah. Okay, so before we begin, there are three terms that I'll be using that you may or may not have heard of. In the testing world and actually in Edulastic also, you'll see the term item thrown around a lot, and that is just simply a question. And so you can have one item with multi-parts, or you can have a single part question, which might be like your traditional true-false question. The other term you'll hear a lot is STEM, and that's the question prompt. So what is 2 plus 2? That's the STEM. And then the distractors are the wrong answers. So what is 2 plus 2? And if I had 3, 1, 4, and 0, then the 4 would be the right answer. And 3, 1, and 0 would be the distractors. So those are the phrases I might be bouncing around, and you'll actually see those in the tool as we get going. And that's a bit of the background. The last thing I'm going to show you before I dive into the product is I'm going to show you, these are the most frequently seen item types on state delivered assessments. So when we're looking at like the SBAC that is delivered on a lot of the West Coast states, if we're looking at park style tests, which are delivered in a lot of the East Coast states, if you're looking at, I can name lots of states like LEAP or AZ Merit or any one of those states, they are most often, this is an aggregate of the most frequently seen item types. So I build questions. I'm part of the content team, and as my role at Edulastic, I build assessments, I build questions, we build district custom assessments, we build premium content bundles that customers can purchase. And with all of that experience, I still narrow my selection of item types when I'm building something to this handful of key, most frequently seen item types. I mean, the obvious reason why is that the more experience our students have with these, then we're not testing, do they know how to use the technology? We're testing their knowledge in those tests. So the more comfortable they are, the more experience they have with them, then it puts them in a more advantageous position. But the other side of it is that with over 50 types of questions in Edulastic, there's no point in me trying to, figure out a whole new question type every time. So it makes things a lot smoother on the teacher or the assessment builder or the team lead if you just have this cadre of item types that you really know well, and it just makes the whole process a lot more efficient. So I happen to pick these, which are the most popular. This list will be available to you on at a later time as well. So you don't have to worry about writing these down, but I just wanted to share with you the thinking behind why I selected the examples that I did for our session today, but also just a little bit of my strategy when I'm building questions is this is what I focus on. Okay, so let's dive into the product. So this is already an assessment that has been started, but I just wanted to give you an idea of what each one of these looked like before we began. So I'm going to just give you a preview of the different types that we're going to build. So this one is a classic question, like true false table chart. It's a fill-in chart. There's a couple of different names you'll see for these. And these are something you'll classically see, like decide if each expression is true or false. You might see something that says, is this equal to, or are these expressions below equal to 2/3? Yes or no. And so then these categories might be equal to 2/3 and not equal to 2/3. You'll also see these written as yes and no. And this format of a question really bodes well for even the youngest students all the way up to the advanced, the highest level students that are using Edulastic. And so if you can imagine something like this table, a kindergartner, for example, could have 2 ice cream cones in this box, 1 ice cream cone in this box, and 4 ice cream cones. And then you could say something like, this is, mark the ones that are equal to 3. And so they could just literally pick just click on the ones that are equal to whatever number or expression you give them. Whereas you can imagine what this might look like in a more advanced level class where they could be very detailed math expressions. These could also be very detailed analysis of some sort of a science experiment or in a historical fact. It could also be some kind of a character analysis, or there's all kinds of analytical expressions that you can do with this format. So this is why I chose this one. And so we'll dive into this one first. The next one I'm going to show you is one that very commonly shows up, and it's one of those where you enter, it's a numeric entry. This in Edulastic, you can also include a dropdown in the numeric entry. And so you have a couple of these options. These, again, I know you've seen these. The students have seen these, are comfortable using this. So that'll be the second one that we go into, because these empty boxes allow us to really explore some of the options for the math teachers. So with that, I'm going to start from scratch and walk you through the process. Let me just save this so I can go back to it if we need to. Okay. So this course assumes that you're all using Edulastic already. And so when I jump to creating a new test, many of you should know and be familiar with the item bank and the test bank. If you are brand new and just gleaming as much information as you can about Edulastic, stick with me, stay with us, because this will, you'll get the overview, but don't get frustrated if I'm hopping around pretty quickly, because we are assuming that you know at least the basics, the 101, as Ileana mentioned earlier. So if you are building questions, now again, as I mentioned in the beginning, we've got 2 camps of people. We've got those that are just playing around, or not playing around, but actually just creating individual questions for themselves or their team, and they want to share their questions. If you're just going to create one-off questions throughout the course of the year, or you have a couple of weeks time and you're just going to pound out a couple of questions, individual questions that you would use later or that you would share with your group, then you might jump here into the item bank. And if you were to click on the item bank, this gives you just the complete list of all questions that are available in the question bank. So here we have over 30,000. No, I didn't even read it correctly. We have over 308,000 questions right now that are individual questions. So that's one of the places you could do if you were just going to build an individual question here and there, you could use this new item. I'm going to demonstrate the other audience today, which is those that are creating benchmarks. And I'm going to create a test. It allows me to have a little more flexibility in the flow and to show you how to set the assignment settings in the end. So that's the rationale behind this thinking. So I'm here in this test library, and I'm going to create a new test. I'm going to create one from scratch, and we'll call this author practice 2. I'm not going to give it a description, but I am just going to at random pick a grade and a subject. We'll do that. And you can't really get beyond anything in Edulastic when you're creating a new test until you actually assign the grade and the subject and give it a title. It just helps you track down your information at a later time. But this is an optional area, and I'm going to say that it's recommended that you make this not optional, that you just make tags part of your practice. And so here I'm going to put authoring so that we can go back to that at some other time. But if you are building a benchmark, you might want to put benchmark 2020 or fall benchmarks, math grade 6. You can create any tags, and this just helps you and your colleagues find it in our test library a lot faster. You can also tag at a question level, and so keeping in mind the layers of tagging you can do, that is one of the ways of collaborating with your colleagues when you're building benchmarks, is using this tags feature. So the first thing I'm going to do here now is I'm going to jump over to add items because I don't have any items already selected and I'm creating one from scratch. So in this add items section, I'm going to go to create new item. Now here is where you'll see all of the different buckets or categories of item types that you can select from. Again, remembering item means question. So we've got the multiple choice, and it's beyond just multiple choice, true, false. This gets into those tables that I was showing you. So it's actually like choosing amongst many choices in these table formats, in a typical multiple choice classic question type, in a multiple select, or a true, false. So I encourage you to go deeper than each one of these label states because it doesn't seem very obvious in the beginning for some of these question types that you may be looking for something called matching, or you might be looking for something called table. And I just encourage you to get very familiar with what's in each one of these. The fill in the blanks is where I'm going to select the second question type that we make, but this represents all different kinds of ways that students can fill in the missing answers. So we've got everything from the drag and drop. We've got text drop down boxes. This is text or numeric entry, so where they can enter the number or the word. You've got options where you can label, you can upload a picture and then you can drag labels here, and that's where the students would label certain parts of a picture. Instead of labeling them by dragging them, you could also have drop-down boxes on the same picture, or you can have them type in. So again, you're seeing the theme here is dragging it, selecting from a set of values, or typing it in yourself. So these 3 types of entries are found in different formats. They're also found all together here in this math text and dropdown. I'll spend just a couple more seconds perusing these. This is those classifications where you're resequencing, you're asking them to categorize certain bits of information. The writing, everything from a full-blown essay with rich text to where they can upload their own images, they can hyperlink to places, or if you want to keep it really simple and just have the plain text, you have that option as well. You've got short text, and then this upload file, I haven't used this very often, but this is where you would upload like a video that you'd want them to respond to, and then they would answer in an essay or written format. The passage base, this is that traditional one that you've seen on probably a number of state assessments, where on one side of the page is some kind of a prompt or a stimulus. That's often what a passage would be called, or a table or a chart that they're responding to. And then on the right side of the page, you would have any type of question. So one of the nice things about Edulastic is if you're building a passage-based question, you can have that stimulus on the left side, and then you can use any one of these to add to that type of passage question. Highlights, you can see these are like hotspots or highlighting, like if you want them, the most youngest students often will just click on a word or a picture and they're highlighting that picture. That would be here under the sentence response. You can have them shade certain areas. You can have them identify hotspots in an image, and then the same thing, they can actually do like a drawing response. Math gives you all kinds of expressions here. Graphing, also you have everything from graphing and then also number lines. The fraction editor, that shows up here again. So a couple of these are being repeated in a couple of the categories. That was designed so that if you, in your mind, are looking for a certain type of question, you'll find it in a couple of different places. You can see charts, like bar charts, graphs, and number lines. The multi-part, this is that typical question where you've got a part one is usually like a recall or a basic question, and then the part two or part B is where they justify that answer. Very, very common on those types of, on those state assessments or big benchmarks. So this is a good practice one to know. And then the last one is actually one of my more favorite question types that we have, and that's an instructions question type. So it is 0-point value. It can sit wherever you want. You can have multiple instruction type questions throughout an assessment. It might say something like, start here, and on this part, you can use a calculator. And then you get to the second part and you may say, pause for day one, everybody, you're done for day one, and they can pick it up on day two. Or it might say from here on out, do not use your calculator. You might say this is not graded. You know, there, you can imagine any one of those situations where you might need to add a little extra information. The first thing they see when they open up their assessment would be this instructions question type. So let's jump over here and I'm going to start building one. I'm going back up to this multiple choice category and I'm going to build one of those tables that we talked about. So I'm going to click on here and here's where I will enter my question. So let's just put, let's put how, let's see here, how many items are in each column. Okay, so we're going to make it, this a really, really basic, maybe like a first or a second grade question. How many items are in each column? So I'm going to just kind of walk you through each one of these. This is that kind of a chart, and we've got the true false here right now, but we have a lot of options to change. First, we're going to put the stems. So each column, this is where I'm going to put like a picture of how many items. I think what I'll do is give you a couple different examples. So let me just do this. I'm going to put X, X, X. That would have like 3 items, for example. So you can use text. You can also insert an image into these stems. And so the images need to be downloaded onto your machine. So let's do this. This is kind of a fun one. It's got some jack-o'-lantern eyeballs. So that would be 2. And for, oops, I was a little too aggressive with that. And I'll do this third one. We'll just do 3 stems in this first column. So you can see I've got a couple of different options going on here. I've got a combination of pictures and letters. I could put numbers. And then once you've got the images in there, if you're using images, you can adjust the size. I've just grabbed the corner, just like I would on a, trying to get rid of that word stem too, and I keep messing up. You would adjust it just the same way that you would a Microsoft Word document or some kind of a drawing app. You know, you just drag it and adjust the size. And you'll want to be conscious of that because depending on the devices that your students are using and how much space they have, you could have fun with some really beautiful pictures, but it makes it like the students are having to scroll to get to the whole picture. So here's my first stem is how many items are in each column. I see I made a typo there. And then I've got the 3 different items. Now I'm not going to do a 4th one here, so if you've had any experience with Edulastic before, you can just pull that out. Here I've got, let's actually preview for a minute here. So I've got the 3, I've got the 2, and then I've got the 7. So I'm going to want to have a couple of different categories here. I'm going to want to have one that's 3, one that's 2, and one that's 7, or 1, 3, 5. You know, you can imagine how this would look here. So you've got a lot of flexibility. So let's start with this one. Let's say 3, 2, and then I'm going to add a 3rd column. That's going to be 7. And I want it to go in order. So I'm going to go 2, 3, 7. And then I realize I'm pretty closely matching that. So let me just kind of mix the order up a little bit there. And now let's take a look at the preview. And so you see I've got my X's, I've got my cubes, and I've got the jack-o'-lantern eyes. This is what it will look like to them. Let's go back here. I'm going to walk you through a couple extra of these options that you can choose here. So formatting, just like you would a Word document, you can come in here and play around. You can also add multimedia items or pictures in the stem up here as well. I'll show you that for the different example. We'll stick with just words on this one so we can really get a feel for what it looks like. I'm going to bold that because I don't feel like it's big enough when I looked at that example. And I actually can play around with the font here. So I can make this even bigger so it kind of matches, or it doesn't just blend in so well with the other ones. So now I've changed this, again, reminding you this can be yes, no, equal, not equal, greater than, less than, equal to. You've got a lot of flexibility here. And you can add as many choices and create as many columns as you want. I can change the point value for each one of these. Since there are 3 pieces of stimulus, I'm going to change it to 3 points. And I want them to get all 3 correct. Let's see here, I'll go down here to scoring. Now I'm going to enable auto scoring. For some of these question types, that's just a given. But some of them you can make it so that you have to manually score them. For example, if they were to have used Scratchpad or something like that, you could make it manually score. I think most teachers that I work with, whenever possible, we want to enable auto scoring. At the same time, if you had some variations in your stems and your answers here, you could accept a partial match. I'm just going to keep it with exact match, meaning that they have to get all of these correct. If this was something a little bit more detailed and they needed to have a grading rubric, you have the option to do that. And you can create a new rubric, or you can use an existing rubric. There are actually videos that for me to explain how to create a rubric would take a good 5 or 6 minutes or so. So I'll refer you to a lot of our videos that we have on our YouTube channel that are very quick videos that walk you through how to build those and how to share them. Now, if you had students that weren't quite sure how to answer this, or there were a couple of different ways that you could answer that, we also have this new feature called Enable Scoring Instructions. So here you would add something like check only one box for each item. You might say, put an answer like, put your answer in a mixed fraction, for example. You know, this is where you can add that scoring item. So let's pause here for a second and go back up and see the changes that we've made. So I've bolded the instructions. I've made this text a little bit bigger. We've got 2, 3, 7. Here's my instruction box. And we can keep building. There's more to go. Let's go down here a little bit further. So let me take a pause for a second. If you are following along and you're not seeing these, there is a trick to this that I actually forgot to tell you at the very beginning. And that is down here in your profile, you're going to turn on something called Power Tools. I will show you how to do that at the end, because if I walk away from this, we'll lose some of the progress that we've made. But if you are not seeing it, this is why. And it's anything that comes really below the display, the scoring level. This is all stuff that is available when you turn on those power tools. And power tools can be turned on for any user. It's just that we make it as a default to turn them off, because sometimes it can be a bit overwhelming for those that are not really needing to use all of these features. So moving down a little bit more here, we can also change the display. So right now, this is in the format of a table. I could make these all in line too. So let me show you what that looks like. I'm sure all of you remember what the table part looks like. And if we changed it in line, now instead of these headings on the chart, as was before, it's got the numbers in line here. These are often selected depending on what your state tests use. So you, again, wanting to get your students familiar with the types of questions they'll see in the high stakes benchmarks, you'd want to think about what those look like for your students and mirror those. You can hear, this is the STEM column title. So that is right here. I can add a title here, and I think I'm just going to put numbers. So see these changes that I'm making here. I can adjust the width. I can make these little boxes larger or smaller. Again, the consideration behind these are, what devices are your students using? How old are they? If they had to scroll down several layers, would the essence of the question be masked or mirrored by a student's frustration level, for example, trying to just really get a sense of the question rather than manipulate the technology? Those are the considerations you'd be thinking about when you're making these changes. So again, you can add row titles, you can change the width. There's two things that I'm going to show you here, and that is the font size. For younger students, you might go, if you can imagine like a kindergarten student, you're going to go huge, and you can see how it's automatically changed the size of the font. You'll see it also changed it in all areas where there's text. And you can also create dividers. So the dividers are often very useful for students who have, when you've got large tables, or you need to really make it a lot clearer for the students, this is where you might want to use the dividers. So now you see we've got a whole different look to this assessment. So once you're building these, let's see here, we need to also select the correct answers. So let's see here, we're going to put in 3, we're going to put 7. I'm noticing there's some sensitivity right now with these little radial dials, and I know that it was discussed by our tech team, and so I know that this is something that will be improved upon in the next couple of weeks, if not sooner. So here's the answer. So I'm setting the answers, I'm setting the correct answers here. And now you as the teacher can preview it with the answers. You can just show the answer. You can see the correct ones. Or you can pretend that you are a student and you could try to answer it and see what happens. And then check your answer. So this gives you a good idea of what the test or what that assignment looks like. So just to summarize, I've got the ability to change the display. And this is true for all the all of the tests or all the items that you'll be creating. You've got a lot of flexibility with the rows, with the size of the rows and the entry boxes. You've got a lot of flexibility with if you want the display, how it should look. Let's see what else. You can enable scoring items. This is something that's on, enable scoring instructions. This is something that's on all tests or all item types that we offer. The display, the dividers. The other thing that you'll notice is the solution. So the solution, or the overall distractor rationale. So you remember I used the word distractor at the beginning of the session, which was the wrong answers. This is where, if you're building an item or a test for other teachers in your district, the teachers will see this distractor rationale. So you can explain why, if the student chose A, why that was incorrect, or what a possible strategy is for helping that student improve. You can explain which one is the correct answer, and then offer some solutions for, again, like I said, strategies for students who might have made a mistake or an error. So this information is only available to teachers. You can put as much information in here. You can put pictures. You can take screenshots of the actual question and upload them in here. That happens frequently. Again, you have all of the options that you would have in any text field Those also are available for explaining why a question or why an answer is correct and why answers are incorrect. The explanation is something that can be student facing. So the explanation is, if this is not like a high stakes benchmark and you want the students to see how they should have solved the problem or get a little bit more information about that question, then you can enter the solution here, or the explanation, for the students. And when they have submitted their tests, if you make it available, they can go through and see what their answer was and what the solution, how they should have answered that, or if they answered it correctly, the steps that they took. So that's the explanation. So again, overall distractor rationale is for the teacher, explanation is for the student, and then hint is also student facing. So you can give them the option for a little hint. The student will have a hint box or a hint bubble to click on and receive that hint from you. If you leave it blank, then they won't see anything. It's just not an option. You can add multiple hints. So we've got a couple of the math tests that we offer that have sort of a vague hint. It gets a little deeper, and then the deepest. And so you can add as many of those as you want. And if you want to remove them, you just simply put that little trash bucket. So those are the things that are consistent across most of the question types. I'm going to jump over here. I've showed you preview mode. I'm going to jump over here to the metadata. Here is where you're going to add the standard. So if you're working on benchmarks or you're working on developing questions, you're most likely interested in assessing how they're doing on a standard. And so even though in Edulastic, you are not required to attach a standard to anything anymore, we used to make that it used to be a firm non-optional step in the question building process. Now you can leave it blank, but I definitely recommend using the standards, especially if you are working on a benchmark. So here's the grade 5. This is where I'm going to get the subject, the standard set, which in California, which is where I am, will do Math Common Core. This is going to be grade 5. And when I browse these, you're going to see all of those grade 5 standards. I can select one. And these are the ones that I've most recently used. So if I'm building an assessment and I'm frequently reusing these, I'm just going to click on those. And so it just makes it one sort of quick step. The next thing is here you can enter the depth of knowledge if you're working towards that direction. You can also enter a difficulty level, Bloom's taxonomy. And then here's the last thing I'm going to remind you about, and that is, again, you can tag a question. So if you're building a series of questions that you're going to use later, use a tag to help jog your memory or remind you of how to find it. It just makes searching these database or these banks a lot quicker and easier. You also could develop a series of tags within your work group or your school or your district. And everybody's working towards the same tags, then your pool of questions is just all the more easier to access, that much more easy to access. Before I leave this metadata page, I want you to see that there's this how to author. So this will launch a video or a little tutorial on how to do this type of question. And if I jump over here, you're going to also see that up here and down here. So this is part of the reason why we're not going into a whole bunch of different question types, is you can play around and explore and then launch these videos. So let me save this. Let me jump into the next question type, because I do want to show you some of the settings that you can use for math question types. So I'm going to create a new item. This is one, again, I'm going into the fill in the blanks section, and here I'm going to make that text drop down. So when I select it, it starts me off with some sample text, and it actually gives me all 4 options that I can use when I'm building this question type. Those are part of this area called the response boxes. So I can add as many as I want here. I can also just reuse these. For the sake of this, and this is what I do when I build them, I just clear these all out, because then it gets a little bit confusing, and now I can just start from scratch. So I am going to use a combination of I'm going to load a video, I'm going to load a simulation, and I'm going to load an image here so you can see how that would look for your students. So again, this is a math question. Let's start with the image. I'm going to go here to the image. And let's see here, I set up one for us today. Of course, it doesn't show up easily. Let's do the downloads. Let's do, I had one in mind that actually was really conducive to this. We'll do this. So I'm just grabbing that model. So here's 3 pi circles, and I can say something like, create an expression that shows this model. This is probably not the word you would use, but this gets the idea across. And so then the students would either do a combination of, they could enter the text, they could do text dropdown, they could actually just do math input, which would be text or numbers, or you could have like math with units. So it might be like 3 inches, 3 feet, etc. So I'm just going to do a little combination here. I'm going to do a text input box. So I've clicked that and it showed up here. This is text input 1. And I'm going to say something like, the problem I want to create is like 1 plus 2 equals 3. So that could be an expression that would be developed by this model. So for the text input, this would be numbers, straight numbers, or it would be letters. So I'm going to just, for the sake of this one, I'm going to put a number 1. And so now I've just set the answer for that. So now I'm going to make this a plus sign. And here I'm going to do a drop-down box. You notice how I'm able to do a couple of different response box types. So the text drop-down, let's say if I'm going for 1 plus 2 equals 3, then for the text drop-down, I might give, I need to set my choices. So I've got no choices here until I set them. So let's go to add new choice. I'm going to make the numbers 1, 2, 3. And now I'm going to select the answer. So if there's a total of 3 of these pies, I'm going to say the correct answer is 2. And then I'm going to say equals, and I want them to put a math input here. So they can only answer numbers here. And that math input would have to be 3. So this is the model here. And let's preview that. So this is what the student sees. And in this box, they're expected to put a number. In this box, they're expected to select one. And then here, because this is math input, I have a whole bunch of options for them. So I'm going to put 3. Okay, so that's sort of a standard question. It's not really a good question because I made it up on the fly, but it's you can see the ways that you can use these types of questions. But when it comes to math questions, there are so many variations of answers that could be right, or ways of creating an expression that could be right, that teachers need to have some flexibility in setting these type of questions. So when I click in here for the text, let's actually jump down here to math input. When I click down here into anything that's numeric or requiring math input, there's the expected answer, but then I also have some options here for evaluation settings. Now, right now, this is set to the mathematical equivalence. So it means any answer that's equivalent to 3 will be accepted on this. So let's test this out. So I would put 1 here, I'd select 2, and let's say I wanted to do 3 over 3. Wonder if that would work. We'll check this answer. No, it doesn't. 1 over 1. Yeah, let's do 3.0. Let's check that answer. So any variation of this would work. And then if this was a numerical one too, I could have done like 1 over 1. I meant to actually make this one a math input in the beginning so I could show you a couple of different models here. But you can see how all of these things that are mathematically equivalent would be accepted. So there is a way though that you can restrict that. And you can use these little terms here. I'm going again to the math input. You can change these evaluation settings. And this launches a box here where you can say it'll be the mathematical equivalence, it has to be the literal equivalence, or it has to follow this format only. So you can set that up, and as you make those changes, you'll see you'll get a couple of different options down here. So the first thing, the student answer must be, so I've set it from mathematical equivalence, but I can put some conditions on that. So if they're going to make fractions, it has to be a simple fraction, or it has to be a mixed fraction. I can set that. If I leave it blank, it can be any equivalence of that. Again, you can go through here, and this would be depending on what your students are used to, what your textbooks or your curriculum requires, what your states require, or just what you've been teaching. This can all mirror those conditions. So this would be something likely a little bit more higher level math. You know, this is maybe when you're getting into 5th, 6th, 7th, and beyond. You know, maybe even starting around high school or 8th grade, high school. You also have a couple of other options that, as we get further through these options, to these choices, you'll get some that might be really relevant to the youngest students. So you can interpret the answer as automatic, as a set, as an interval. You know, so if you're marking this and you're wondering what that's going to look like, it has to be in this format in order to be accepted correctly. So there are some nice settings here. Finally, down to the miscellaneous. Now, this is something that I'm finding is really useful for kindergarten through 3rd and 4th grade students, where you can ignore the case. So if they're typing wrong, if there's variables included and they have a capital A versus a lowercase a, you can ignore that for them. You can lock down the kinds of variables or the types of variables that they can use. So this is just restricting them from putting every letter in the alphabet, and you know, they're following a more set restricted set of limitations. You can exclusively limit the entry to numbers only. Now, this is really relevant for those teachers who are using some of the math curriculum where the students are being trained to put the units in the question or in their answer. So if the answer is 3 cubic feet, then they're trained to always write 3 foot to the cube, or however they're trained to enter that in. But if you don't want them to worry about that and for that to open up a whole nother level of options, then you could just limit the entry to numbers only, which means they could only enter numbers in that open box. You can ignore certain things here. So play around with these different types of evaluation settings. The most liberal, the freest one to do is just mathematic equivalence and not select any of these. And it will automatically allow any equivalent of that answer to be accepted. Let's see here again. This is same things. You're going to recognize a lot of these things from font size to the size of the boxes and the shapes. The nice thing about this too is you have a choice of keypads. So for some of the younger students I've been working with, we've selected only numbers because we don't want the basic keypad with a couple extra fractions and mixed numbers and all those other options to confuse them. So you can play around with what those keypads look like. You can go all the way up to a completely full keypad, which is every type of symbol that we offer. Or you could be a little bit more exclusive, like just a geometry one or just a trigonometry keypad. So that's some really great options. And then again, you'll recognize the overall distractor rationale, the explanation and the hints. And then the last thing I wanted to show you was let's talk about adding some multimedia, and then we'll wrap up and have a little bit of time for questions. So if I wanted to add a video in here, for example, I'm going to jump over here because I've already sort of primed a YouTube video on how to add. So I have gone to, let me just back out of this. I have gone to this share mode. You have a choice of 2 different things. You can grab the embed code, or you can grab just the link. I'm going to start with the embed code. Gives you this code that I'm just going to copy it all. I'm just Control A and copying it. And now when I jump back over here and I enter the embed code here, it's right with this insert video. I could just put that URL. I can put the embed code, or I could upload something that I've recorded myself and I have on my files or on my hard drive, and I can upload that into Edulastic. Let's do this embed code so you can see how simple it is. Oh, see, I didn't do it right. I wasn't on the right. There we go. And so here's that video. And so when the students push play, they can actually watch that video and then respond to it using these text boxes. Or they can watch the video first and then answer the question. The other cool thing that you can do is take that same idea and let's do simulations. Let's add, using the embed code, a simulation from one of these like PhET interactive science sites. So again, I'm going to the embed code. I'm just clicking on that, copying it, and pasting it in the exact same way. Let's just add that. So I'm going again, that's considered like a video. So I'm going back to the embed code and I'm inserting it. And so now this gives my students a real interactive experience. And the key to this is just knowing what is allowed by your firewall and what your students have access to. But this is like a true interactive science simulation. I can see how static cling works, simulating that, and then you can ask some questions about it. You can change all this stuff around. This is all just by simply pasting in that embed code. So you can see here that you've got a lot of options for even the most basic, what could be just a 2 + 2 = fill in the blank. You can also go all the way to some really interactive pieces here. So I've made just a giant mess of this question, but I hope you have the understanding of how you can do this. You also have, again, these authoring tools here and here. So if you are ready to save, again, you've got the metadata here, you can add that. If I just want to save and come back to it later, it's going to give me this little warning that there was not there's not a thing associated with, oh, this is other ones that I've created. There's not any standards associated with this. So eventually I'll want to put a standard on that. But here's the 2 questions that I've made. Let me spend just a few seconds. If you were working with a team and you wanted to collaborate and build the questions together, then you could all build your items here. You could tag them, and then you could come together and select the right questions to make each test. So that's one way of doing it. Another way is one person can start to build this test and then share it with others in the district or with other individuals in their group. So this, by just entering this email, I don't think there's other teachers in this, but I would just say like Sam at Edulastic. Well, here's a few other teachers. I'll make this available to my teachers. And if I had somebody else here, it would show up and then they could add, edit, or remove items, or just view them and duplicate, make their own clone of these items. And then I could also send this email that will say, hey, Sam, you've got access to this web page or to this test, help me build it, or whatever message you want to put there. It will show up in that teacher's shared items, shared with me items. So then they can pick it up and start building along with you. So those are a couple of the collaboration tools. A lot of teachers will start, save it as a draft, and then assign it later. You can also publish it without actually assigning it, as you probably know from building other items in Edulastic. For the most secure scenarios, you'd want to keep it in your private library and just share it with just individuals via link sharing, very much like a doc that you would use, and you could just share a link to the doc, and those people who have access to this can have edit, read, write, or just view privileges. Here's once you've set that up and shared it, then you just copy that and share it with your colleagues. You could also name those individuals. So this is one way of really keeping those major benchmarks private, keeping them out of the school or the district library so students or teachers don't have access to them before the major benchmarks. And it's a way of keeping your tests, the integrity of your test, pretty pure. So, okay, I've said a lot. I hope that I covered a lot of the overall steps, but I'm happy to answer questions now for the next few minutes.
All right, thank you so much, Jenny. I'm going to take over sharing for a little bit to share a couple more things.
Okay.
And please, during this time, think about any questions you might have and go ahead and enter them into the Q&A. Let me figure out the, all right. Okay, hello again. So sharing my screen. Here we go. Can everyone see that?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, so Jenny went over so many wonderful things today that'll get you up and going with authoring resources on Edulastic, authoring questions in Edulastic. And just want to point out again that when you're going to author a question, you'll see that How to Author button in that upper right corner, which will walk you through the basics of the question as well as question type videos as well. We also have a really awesome knowledge base, and there is where you can find a bunch of articles about authoring questions, as well as any other questions you might have can be answered in this area of our website. And I'll share the link in a moment. If you enjoyed learning about authoring today and you want to dive deeper in different areas or just kind of get to know what other question types are out there, there are a couple of resources on this page I'd like to highlight for you. One is the graphing question webinar that we did a couple weeks ago. It's now recorded and online on our YouTube channel. And this is a little graphic for it. So if you want to dive into graphing, that's a great one to view next. If you want to learn more about FETSIMs or just got to revisit that with a science teacher, then you can watch that video on our YouTube channel. We'll also be sending the recording to this. You can revisit anything that Jenny shared later tomorrow once it's sent to you. And the question type showcase goes over the 50 different item types and highlights them so you understand what they're all about before diving in. And I'll also share the YouTube channel link as well so you can explore our very thorough basically a database of videos, help videos, and informational videos, and videos that show educators using Edulastic there. And then you can join us next week. So earlier, Jenny mentioned that we are kind of doing a two-part series here. This is how to. Next week's a little more pedagogical. And so we hope you'll join us then. And now we'll take questions. So I think Jenny answered one of the ones in the Q&A.
Yeah, there was one embedding the video. All of the tools that I showed you when you're building a question, when you're typing the text, those are all free to everybody. So everything from special characters, math characters, and videos and all that is all free. It's all part of Edulastic for everybody.
Awesome. Any other questions? I'm posting these links in here so you can access them now. We'll also have a follow-up survey that you'll be able to access at the end of this, where we hope you'll leave some feedback for us and let us know what you thought about today's event.
Yeah, this is the first time we've offered this, and believe it or not, there's only about 15% of our users out of our hundreds of thousands of users that actually create their own questions. So it often is not a priority in some of our Q&As or some of our sessions like this. So we just wanted to make sure that everybody had what they needed to really use Edulastic to its fullest.
Yep. I think that's everything. Thanks again, everyone, for joining us. Please keep in touch, and hopefully we'll see you next week. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.